Welcome to this presentation of They Had Names, a community-focused approach to documenting the names of African Americans in early records of Liberty County, Georgia. In 1870, Pulaski Carter was a formerly enslaved farmer in Liberty County, Georgia. In 1873, he submitted a Southern Claims Commission petition for property taken from him by Sherman's army when they were foraging in Liberty County at the end of 1864. And in his testimony, he talked about his life. So why did Pulaski Carter choose the surname Carter at emancipation when we know that Alexander S. Quarterman was the last person to hold him in slavery? He didn't say in his testimony, and the They Had Names project was conceived in part to help descendants answer questions like those. I believe we've found the answer for Pulaski Carter, but before I talk about that, I'd like to situate Liberty County in geography and history, talk about the They Had Names project, where we found the records and how we got them online, and what being able to have all of these records together in a searchable database might mean for people to be able to research their ancestors. Liberty County is on the Georgia coast, southwest of Savannah, and about an hour north of Brunswick, which was where I am. In the 1750s, the English colony of Georgia lifted its ban on slavery, and a group of white planters from around the Dorchester, South Carolina area started migrating to the Midway area of Liberty County, what was then St. John's Parish, bringing with them about 3 times their number in enslaved people who were mostly from West Africa. The enslaved people were forced to build rice and cotton plantations in enormously difficult circumstances. Through their labor, the white planters became wealthy and were among the elite of their day with ties of marriage and family throughout the Northeast. When the American Revolution came, their influence helped bring Georgia into the war, kicking and screaming, basically. Liberty County received its name from that effort. Liberty County is also part of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. That's a very brief history of Liberty County, just to set the scene for this talk, because I'm not a historian, nor am I qualified in any way to tell the history of Liberty County's African American community. I'm a white, obviously retired federal civil servant who took up genealogy as a hobby about 4 years ago. I quickly learned that my father's paternal side were among those white planters who came from South Carolina to Liberty County in the mid-1750s. I didn't know that previously. My parents left Georgia after my father graduated from Georgia Tech, and I didn't grow up in Georgia, which you can probably tell by my voice. In fact, prior to 2017, I had actually never heard of Liberty County. As I researched, a newfound cousin gave me a copy of my 4th great-grandfather, John Ashmore's 1841 will. He died in Liberty County in 1849. The will named 11 people he was holding in slavery. I knew intellectually, of course, that my Georgia family were likely to have been slaveholders, but seeing the actual names had a real emotional impact. I decided to see if I could find out what happened to them. I was curious whether any of them might have taken the Ashmore surname and what it might mean if they did or didn't. So I went to the 1870 census and I found Toby Ashmore. He was the only one of the 11 people mentioned in the will to have taken the Ashmore surname. He was there with his wife, his son, and his 2 daughters. Frank Williams, another of the 11, was on the same page, but obviously took a different surname. Then I found the Freedmen's Bank records. Sandy Maybank and Andrew Law listed Toby Ashmore as their brother. Sibby West is listed as Sandy's mother and Sibby Ashmore as Andrew's mother. This led me to understand that of the 11 people in the will, 8 were a family. Sibby was their mother and 6 others were Toby's siblings. The ones who survived to the date of this record all had different surnames. After I put together as much information as I could find, I decided to reach out to people on Ancestry who had Toby Ashmore in their tree, since his descendants could find him in the 1870 census as easily as I could. By this time, though, I had discovered more information about him from information I found online about my family and that those newfound cousins had given me. 5 people have responded so far, and I've given them what I have. One of them was Charlie Jordan, who was open to becoming friends. He was kind enough to give me access to his DNA, and that's how we discovered the truth about why Toby took the Ashmore surname. JC is my first cousin once removed on that Ashmore line, and he matches Charlie. Toby was most likely John Ashmore's son or his grandson. I started thinking about how much more difficult it was for Charlie to find information about his family from before the Civil War than it was for me. Around that time, another huge influence came into my life. Hermina Glasshill had moved from Atlanta to Liberty County. She's the premier historian of the life of Susie King Taylor, the formerly enslaved woman who wrote her memoir of her experiences in the Civil War as a nurse attached to her husband's USCT unit. Susie, was also a teacher and was a Liberty County native. Hermina and I met serendipitously as she was founding the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center in Liberty County, and her passion for telling Susie King Taylor's story and her meticulous scholarship made me want to help in any way I could. In 4 short years, Hermina has transformed the historical preservation environment in Liberty County. I've included links to her work in the handout, but suffice it to say that she has become the first African-American president of the Liberty County Historical Society, which is a change I honestly never thought I would see. The third major influence was the realization that there were a lot of antebellum records naming African Americans, but those names were omitted from the available research resources. In the 1960s and 70s, for example, the Georgia Genealogical Magazine, which bills itself as a magazine of genealogical source material concerning Georgians, had abstracted many and published many of the wills in counties throughout Georgia, but the abstracts almost always left out the names of the enslaved people. For example, here is how my 4th great-grandfather John Ashmore's will appeared in the abstracts. The only reason it was even mentioned that slaves were included was because of an unusual codicil, and of course no names were given. You would never know from seeing this that there were 11 names in that will. The original records, these wills, estate inventories, are also all online, but they're not searchable. And at the time I did this, at least, they were only indexed by the slaveholder's name. Of course, Ancestry has changed some of that. Finally, in the reading I was doing about Liberty County history, I realized that so many of the narratives eliminated or minimized the contribution that African Americans made to building Liberty County. They created the wealth that allowed these planters to have such an outsized influence on American political life. And yet this fact, and especially their names, were rarely mentioned in these history books. My hope is that placing the names online will personalize this history to those who are set on a nostalgic or mythologic view of the past. So all those factors combine to wind up in the creation of this website. It brings together abstracts and transcripts into a searchable database of Liberty County probate documents, deed records, church records, and other records naming enslaved and free African Americans. You see some of the resources here. It also has an annotated bibliography and a guide for visiting the Midway and Liberty County area, plus research guides and research notes to help other researchers, and also some information about us. I say us because shortly after the project started, a friend, Kathy Dillon, who has no connection to Liberty County, or even any family connection to this work, volunteered to transcribe for the site. And I so appreciate her time and her dedication to this project. So here's what the website has. You will see why I call this a community-focused project, because we are not focusing on individual family lines. Instead, we are putting online all the records we can find for this county that name African Americans. There are probate records, wills, estate inventories, deeds. There are church records, free persons of color records. We have our latest project has been transcribing the Southern Claims Commission petitions. We have research on individuals and families, and then also research guides. Where did we find these records? Almost all of them were found online. I don't go to the Liberty County Courthouse. That makes this a perfect project for individuals or groups to take on if they don't live in the county they're researching. Almost all of the records came from Family Search, though many of them are also on Ancestry. I use Family Search because it's free, and that way, since there's a citation with every record we put online, people can find the original records because, of course, we're human, we can make mistakes in the transcription. Some of the records were found online at the Georgia Archives virtual vault, and others came from the kindness of strangers, people who were strangers when I reached out to them and who were willing to give me some documents and some help. So how do you use this site? It's essentially one big blog. Each abstract or transcript of a record is a blog post, and of course, blogs are searchable. For example, if we, in the search bar at the top of every screen, if we search for the name Pulaski, we find every record on the site that contains his name. For Pulaski, since it's a relatively unusual name, that's not all that many records. Of course, if you're working on someone with a more common name, you will pull up more records, but that's still easier than searching through thousands of pages of handwritten records to find one first name. I'm going to dive into how to use Family Search to find these probate deeds and records. Many of you probably already know how to do this, not searching the records, but searching the catalog, but I didn't when I started this out. So I'm hoping it may be news to someone else here and may transform their research the way it did mine. Most of those wills, estate inventories, and other documents naming enslaved people are online. Family Search went through courthouses many years ago and digitized them, and has also been in the process of transforming its microfilmed records into digitization, which it expects to have done by the end of this year. So you can access them online. They're just not indexed. You can't search them. You have to browse through them page by page and look at that chicken scratch old handwriting to find the names. So I'm going to walk through this little video of how to find those records. You go to the search screen and catalog, not search. And then I use author for county records because the county is the author of the records. You can also use place name. I find it turns slightly different results. So I put the county name in there, and I'm going to go here to the Court of Ordinary Records. You can see there are 33 record sets. As I scroll down, you can see what kinds of records are there. Let's stop at inventories and appraisements. Here you will see the Georgia probate records are available online, so I could have gotten to them that way, but I wanted to demonstrate the other method. Then you browse the collection. You do not search it. Go to your county. I'm going to pick out just a random record set here to demonstrate what you will see. And you will see basically the digitized what was a microfilm of all of those records. You can click through them to search for them. I'm going to show in a minute another method, assuming that there is a handwritten or written index. But basically, that's how you get to the records. And I have found paging through these records to be so enormously beneficial. I just can't believe I didn't know how to do that before. This is what you find, of course, in the records. You find these old handwritten records, the estate inventories, the wills, the estate accounts. And so there's no reason why every single person should have to page through every single record looking for a particular name. That's what this project is designed, hopefully, to prevent. So what we do is we take each record and either transcript or we make an abstract. For the wills, they're transcribed or abstracted. The estate inventories have all been abstracted. And by that, I mean that I put the data in a particular format, and then there's a table with the names of the enslaved people and any other information that was included. And the names of the enslaved people are left in the same order as they were in the estate inventory, because I have found that often they were in family order, and you can usually tell that by the value, that it would be a mother first and then the children following. Sometimes it names that, but often it doesn't. And I have found in many cases where I've been able to, that I can confirm that they are a family. Then we come to the deed records. Those are the other really important set of documents in this project. Like the probate records, Family Search digitized them in counties many years ago, and they are online but not indexed digitally. Deed records naming enslaved people include bills of sale, marriage contracts in which a woman brought enslaved people into the marriage and they were put into trust for her, chattel mortgages in which slaveholders used their enslaved people as collateral on promissory notes, and deeds of gift in which doting parents or grandparents gave enslaved people, often enslaved children, to their own children or grandchildren on special anniversaries. Here's how to find those records on Family Search. It's the same method beginning as the other. You search the catalog, not search. And again, these are county records, so I usually put in author as the county and then search. Many of these records, I'm going to go to Superior Court because that's where the deed records were kept, and then click on deeds and mortgages. These are all the record sets. And the little camera to the right means that they've been digitized and are online and available. Those first records were indexes that the court officials created for these records, handwritten or typed, and then you see the deed books below. So I'm going to go back to this index and just click on a random index record within here, and you'll see it's an actual index. You just can't search it. And so if I look at the first record here, it's going to tell me that this record for Edward Andrews can be found on page 140 of Book X. So I'm going to go back, not using that backwards key, but the backwards key in my browser. And I'm going to go down to Book X, click on it. And now I have all those pages and I have to find page 140. So I'm just going to click someplace randomly that might be close enough. And I got to page 134. And so I changed the image number. I could just page through, but I found that this works. And I just got lucky and I hit page 140. So there is that record from that index. So you can use those indexes. They're of course in alphabetical order to find, if you know the surname of the slave owner, or after 1865, the name of the formerly enslaved person who bought land, had other deed transactions. You can find these records in this way. What we've been doing is paging through all these records, and I look for, read the record and find the names of enslaved people and then create an abstract out of that record. Here's what they look like in the original. A bill of sale, Pulaski is named. A deed of gift in which a boy named Robert, about 3 years old, was given away. And then marriage contracts, which would list all the enslaved people the woman was bringing into the marriage. And so those turn into abstracts like this. I always do them in a very strict format so that they can be parsed at some point and added to a larger database. Life in early Liberty County was focused around the church, in this case, the Midway Congregational Church, founded in 1752. It had both white and Black members from its earliest days, and the Black members followed the same process for membership as the white members did. The church as it stands today is seen on the right. The current building dates from 1792, with the earlier building having been burned by the British during the Revolutionary War. The church kept operating as a church from 1752 to 1867, and it kept detailed records. The records of the white members were published years ago in the History and Published Records of the Midway Congregational Church, a book by James Stacy. But there were quarterly session records, meetings in which they recorded new memberships, departures for other churches, and disciplinary cases, and those weren't included. In fact, I didn't know that those existed until I accidentally ran across them on Ancestry and their own Family Search as well. In those records, there were 3,889 references to named African Americans during that time period. This is what the records looked like. And this is the earliest reference to a named African American member of that church. On June 26, 1756, Scipio and Judy were received into membership. Usually the reference would name the enslaver, but for some reason the very earliest ones don't. The photo on the left is the second floor of the church, which was then the slave gallery. I turned those references into a sortable spreadsheet that you can see here. My current project is recreating the list of African American members, since these there's more references than there were people. It looks like there were a total of 1,200 to 1,400 African American members over that period from 1752 to 1867, when the church disbanded after the Civil War, and the African American members started their own church, and they leased this church building, essentially saving the building after the Civil War. They later founded another church, the First Midway Presbyterian Church, down the road, and in their cemetery is where you'll find the historical marker for Susie King Taylor that I showed in the earlier slide about Hermina Glass Hill. Susie King Taylor lived in this area. In 1846, a white preacher named Charles Colcott Jones made a census of every African American member of a church in Liberty County's 15th district. There are 1,146 people, both enslaved and free, named on this list. You can just imagine what a remarkable document that was. And I found it by finding a reference in the Dwelling Place book by Erskine Clark. And when I reached out to him, he sent me a copy of the document. The top image here is extracted from that list, and it shows my fourth great grandfather, John Ashmore, and 6 of the people he was holding in slavery. One of them is Toby. He was attending the North Newport Baptist Church at that point. That church became the first African Baptist church, the oldest African American church in Liberty County, though at the time he attended it, it had both white and black members. The lower document is from the Pleasant Grove church records, which also came from a newfound cousin who had gotten them from the Georgia archives. I wouldn't have known they existed otherwise. And here is Toby being baptized into that church in 1832. I've put all these records as well online, and some for other churches. Many counties also have court records that have been digitized. We've been focusing on antebellum records, but I know that people want to trace their ancestors that they might find in those records past 1870. And of course, we all run into difficulties between 1880 and 1900 because of the missing 1890 census. So as I started going through these Superior Court records, I realized that they contain divorce cases. So Kathy and I have gone through all these records page by page from 1865 to 1919 and pulled out all the divorce records into a table, because often the divorce records will give the names of minors, other details, and it may be the only explanation for a change in surname for a woman between 1880 and the 1900 census. I mentioned the kindness of strangers, and I just want to call that out. I started reaching out. I waited to start reaching out to other people until I already had the website online and a good amount of work done, so that they would know I was serious and not just trying to get them to do my work for me. Then I contacted Dr. Erskine Clark, who has been amazing about giving me documents. He recently donated his documents to the Columbia Theological Seminary, and Brian Hecker there in their archives department has also been fantastic So helpful in helping me find documents. And then Dr. Peggy Hargis, who's a retired professor from Georgia Southern University, she had done research on the Southern Claims Commission process, and she contributed the exhibits that are at the Dorchester African American Museum in Liberty County. So I reached out to her, and she has given me advice, information, and she actually got a friend to truck her paper records down to me at one point. So I am just so grateful for the people who have been helpful towards this project. So what happens when you're ready to put the records online? I started doing that immediately because I did not want to be holding records that someone might need and to have them not be available when that person was looking. So some considerations in putting them online. You don't need to be an expert. You don't especially need to be a technology expert just to put transcriptions or abstracts online. I'll explain that in a minute, but also the difference between free and paid. I started with a free blog, wordpress.com. It was easy, and the great thing about free is that if something happens to you, the information stays there. I have an old unrelated blog that's been around for about 10 years now. Whereas if you pay, which I finally did because I wanted a few more features, then if something happens to you, the information goes away. And so it's a good idea to have a succession plan, basically. And then people asked me at the beginning, why put it online? Why not just make a book out of it? And of course, it's because the whole is so much more than the sum of the parts. When you have it online and you can search and see the records together, and if you make it into a book, there's always problems indexing these kinds of books. Easy ways to put the records online. Again, wordpress.com is a free blog. There are a ton of YouTube videos on how to do that, and they make it easy because they want you to do it. Someone I was talking to recently had just a wonderful idea. She does it in Google Docs, and then with Google Docs, you can easily put it on what's called Google Sites. It's free, and it's just a very simple way of doing it that people can still find through, of all things, Google. You can also, if you are finding individual documents, of course, most of you must be familiar with the Facebook groups that are out there, Beyond Kin, I've traced my enslaved ancestors, etc. I recommend putting records on a website just because you can't be certain that someone will find them in the files of those particular groups. And then, of course, the Beyond Kin website has a whole methodology for putting the records onto Ancestry. I use right now, I have a WordPress blog paid with my own domain name, and I've learned how to do it, but you definitely, you don't have to start with much knowledge. This project also makes it possible to trace the slave owners. We all know why that's important, to trace the lines of inheritance that explain why enslaved people were where they were at a particular time, and to find them in the records. This is an example of the critical importance of a community-focused approach rather than tracing individual family lines. Here are 5 men, white men from Liberty County. All were planters, all were slave owners. You can see one died 1788, 1802, 1803, 1813, one after 1820. So what they all had in common, besides being slave owners, was they were married to this woman, each one at a time. I have not been able to find her birth date, not been able to find her death date, but I realized that I was seeing Margaret with all these different surnames in different records, and I didn't know it was all the same person. Once I got a thread of that, I was able to pull back into all the records and figure it out. The deed records helped particularly. So, of course, it was common for a woman who was left with young children when her husband died to remarry quickly, but Margaret Stacy married an awful lot of men, and very quickly, one didn't even make it out a year. And so I've just kind of had some doubts about her, hence the little Black Widow logo for her. I mean, she attended 2 estate inventories for 2 different husbands in the same year. I've started using mind maps for cases like this. And this, I know it's difficult to read, but it's intended to put all the records together. She had children with 2 of the husbands. And so I put each estate inventory or document that named enslaved people involving her into this mind map. And I was able to trace a number of the names through time that way. Like I said, I don't know when she died. I would like to know because there might be an estate inventory, but I don't believe it's in the Liberty County records or I would have found it. She last married Nathan Williamson in 1818, and they had a marriage contract in which she named some of the people that she had inherited from the other husbands. In 1820, Nathan Williamson put this notice in a Savannah newspaper saying that she had essentially deserted him. I don't know who had the right of that story, but I do have my suspicions about Margaret. In any case, Margaret's story illustrates the benefits of this community-focused approach. Since I found her records without realizing they were all for the same person, and I probably never would have realized it without having all the records in a searchable database. But it also illustrates the risk because it's very easy to see what we want to see and disregard the unknowns, especially when there appear to be a lot of records available. It's so tempting to draw connections that may not exist. In this case, there was a Lucy and a Jim in John Croft's 1802 estate inventory that Margaret was the administrator for. And when his estate was re-inventoried in 1815 to allow their daughter Louisa to take her share, there was also a Lucy and a Jim. And then in 1818, when Margaret did her marriage contract with Nathan Williamson, there was a Lucy and a Jim. And so it's very tempting to see that and say, I've got a lot of records. That's probably the same Lucy and Jim. In this case, though, since I did have a lot of records, I realized that this was John Croft's 1815 estate inventory, but Margaret's husband, Stephen Hoyt, had an inventory in 1815. I'm sorry, John Howell had an estate inventory in 1815, and there was also a Lucy and a Jim there. And then in 1818, Margaret started gifting enslaved children to her grandchildren, and she gifted a Jim and a Lucy. In this case, we had enough detail to know that that Jim and that Lucy were children when they were given to her grandchildren, so that this line is probably more correct, the top line, but I do always have to be careful about drawing those conclusions and putting in lots of weasel words in the conclusions, and it always worries me, the potential of telling someone the wrong thing. So why did Pulaski Carter, who we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, choose the surname Carter at emancipation? We know from the Southern Claims Commission petition records that Alexander S. Quarterman was the last person to hold him in slavery. From other records, I know that Alexander inherited Pulaski from his grandfather, Thomas Quarterman, in 1857. In 1840, Thomas W. Quarterman, who was Alexander's brother, bought Nancy, Edward, Titus, Pulaski, and Stephen from a woman named Sarah Amanda Mara. Thomas W. Quarterman then, for some reason, transferred his title to them to Thomas Quarterman, his father, and Alexander's father. In 1833, I found that Sarah Amanda Mara had inherited a Pulaski from her father, Morgan Mara. With Pulaski being a fairly unusual name, I was pretty sure that that was him. Then I found in 1819 that Louis McTerr, a tailor, had left a Pulaski to Morgan Mara, Sarah's father. He also left $400 to John Carter, the son of his friend Hepworth Carter. So the name Carter enters the picture in 1819. Hepworth Carter in 1812 left a will saying that his enslaved people should all be sold and the proceeds divvied among his heirs. In 1791, he had money trouble, and some of his enslaved people were sold at auction to settle his debts. So we know that Hepworth Carter did sell people. I have not found a record that names Pulaski, yet I believe that this must be the connection that explains why Pulaski took the surname Carter. It's likely that his mother belonged to Hepworth Carter. In Liberty County, it was very common for newly freed people not to take the name of the last enslaver. And when I have been able to find the reasons for the surnames that they did choose, I have often found that they're reaching back into their family tree to a very early enslaver of their family, like leaving clues for their descendants who will be looking for them. I hope that when things are safe again, you all will consider visiting Liberty County. It's a remarkable place. The photo on the right is from the Liberty County Historical Society building downtown Hinesville, where Hermina Glass Hill has her permanent Susie King Taylor exhibit, and you will definitely not want to miss that. On the left-hand side, Dorchester Academy has a very old history in Liberty County, and as well with the civil rights movement, played a prominent place in that. And Hermina has a permanent exhibit there on the civil rights movement's connections to Liberty County that's just remarkable. The Sankofa African American Heritage Trail has a driving trail of historic African American sites around Liberty County. That's a great thing to do. And then just much of the scenery, particularly in the Midway area, is so picturesque. Just a wonderful place to visit. Thank you for listening to me. Anybody feel free to contact me, jnscole@yahoo.com. The handout has links to things I wasn't able to include in the presentation. I will be donating the fee for today's presentation to the Susie King Taylor Underground Railroad Park that Hermina Glass Hill is preparing to construct in Liberty County, and there are details on that link in the handout. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.